Why do we work 8 hours a day? Think about it. You wake up, get ready, travel to work, and then spend roughly 8 hours there before you're finally allowed to go home. But why eight? Why not six? Why not four? And who looked at the 24 hours in a day and decided that exactly 8 of them should belong to your employer? The strange part is that 8 hours was not always normal. In the early days of industrialization, working 8 hours would have sounded almost luxurious. Factory workers could spend 10, 12, 14, or even more hours a day at work, often 6 days a week. So where did the 8-hour idea come from? One of the earliest people to clearly promote it was a Welsh social reformer named Robert Owen. In 1817, Owen argued for a simple division of the day: 8 hours for work, 8 hours for recreation, and 8 hours for rest. It wasn't just a catchy slogan. Owen believed workers needed time to sleep, live, learn, and actually be human. But an idea on paper is one thing. Getting employers to accept it was another. For decades, workers organized, protested, and demanded shorter working hours. And in 1856, something remarkable happened in Melbourne, Australia. On April 21st, a group of stonemasons walked off their jobs and marched through the city, demanding an 8-hour workday without losing their pay. At the time, workers could be working around 14 hours a day. The stonemasons won. They became some of the first organized workers in the world to successfully secure an 8-hour day, and their victory helped inspire a much larger movement. But the fight wasn't over. In the United States, the demand for 8 hours became especially powerful among organized labor. On May 1st, 1886, tens of thousands of workers across the country went on strike demanding an 8-hour day. In Chicago, the movement eventually led to the infamous Haymarket Affair on May 4th. A bomb was thrown at police during a labor rally. Gunfire followed, and people were killed. The event became a defining moment in the international labor movement. The 8-hour day was no longer just an idea. It had become something workers were willing to risk their lives fighting for. And slowly, governments and companies began giving in. In the United States, the Adamson Act of 1916 established an 8-hour day for interstate railroad workers. But here's where the story takes another turn. You might think Henry Ford invented the 8-hour workday. He didn't. The idea had been around for more than a century, but Ford helped make the 8-hour day and 5-day work week incredibly influential. In 1914, Ford introduced an 8-hour day for his factory workers and raised the minimum daily wage to $5. Then, on May 1st, 1926, Ford Motor Company officially adopted a 5-day, 40-hour work week for its factory workers. And Ford wasn't doing this purely out of kindness. He had discovered something important. Workers were exhausted. Long hours could mean high turnover and lower efficiency. Ford believed that giving workers more leisure could actually benefit the company. More rest, more time with family, and importantly for Ford, more time for people to spend money. The factory didn't just need workers, it needed customers. So the 8-hour day wasn't simply a gift from a generous businessman. It was the result of decades of pressure from workers, changing laws, economic calculations, and companies discovering that exhausted employees weren't necessarily good for business. And even after Ford adopted the 40-hour week, it still wasn't the law for everyone. That came later. In 1938, the United States passed the Fair Labor Standards Act, which initially set the standard work week at 44 hours and required overtime pay for many workers beyond that limit. By 1940, the standard had been reduced to 40 hours. And eventually, the 8-hour workday and 5-day work week became so familiar that we stopped seeing them as historical achievements. We just call it a normal job. But here's the weirdest part. 8 hours was never some magical amount of time that human beings were designed to work. It was a compromise. A compromise fought for by workers who wanted their lives back. A compromise accepted by businesses when shorter hours could still produce good results. And a structure eventually reinforced by law. So when someone tells you you work 8 hours because that's just how work works, that's not really true. There was nothing inevitable about it. People fought for it. People protested for it. People were injured and killed during the struggle for it. And eventually, an idea that once sounded radical became the routine schedule millions of people now live by. 8 hours for work, 8 hours for rest, 8 hours for yourself. And the next time you look at the clock and realize you've been working for 8 hours, remember, those 8 hours weren't handed down by nature. Humans chose them. And for a long time, humans had to fight to get them.